Silence. Her fingers clamped onto my arm, harder than they ever had before. Her eyes cut to the staircase, terrified, pleading, while the rest of the table laughed on blind. 3 words slipped from her lips, shaking but sharp enough to slice through everything. Please, just go. I rose, without knowing what waited upstairs. The night air met me like a slap, cold, sharp, and almost too clean after the heavy perfume of the dining room. I could still hear the echoes of laughter behind me, forced and rehearsed, like a stage play performed for an audience I hadn't agreed to be part of. My pulse was steady, but my mind was not. Every step down the walkway felt both wrong and right at the same time, like walking out a storm before you even knew if the roof could hold. Her grip still lingered on my arm, phantom strong, trembling with a warning I couldn't yet translate. I replayed the look in her eyes as if they were photographs burned into the back of my skull. Not worry, not nerves. It was the kind of fear that doesn't bluff, the kind that belongs to people who've seen something they shouldn't have. And the words she whispered carried more weight than the room full of voices I'd left behind. A car sat idling at the curb as if it had been waiting, its headlights cutting through the fog. I lifted my hand without thinking, and the driver pulled forward, window rolling down just enough for me to see his face lit by the dash glow. "Need a ride?" he asked casually, as though I hadn't just fled a house that smelled like secrets. I nodded and slid into the back seat, the door closing with a thud that sounded like a verdict. The city lights bled across the glass as we moved, shadows stretching and folding over me in rhythm with the hum of the engine. My coat was still hanging on the back of the chair inside, my half-finished plate abandoned, little anchors I'd left behind in my haste. But her voice, trembling and raw, followed me into that car, curling around me tighter than any fabric. I had been in enough boardrooms, enough closed-door negotiations, to recognize when a room held stakes too sharp to ignore. Tonight, that house had felt less like family, and more like a setup wrapped in celebration. The driver's eyes met mine in the rearview mirror, reading more than I wanted to show. I leaned back, silent, letting the silence do what words couldn't. Outside, the streets blurred by, but inside, my thoughts lined up like dominoes, each one leading to the next. Their smiles when I arrived, the sudden warmth that felt rehearsed, the way her mother's hand lingered over my glass, always too ready to refill. None of it fit, not until now, when the car stopped in front of my house. The porch light blinked on automatically, painting the steps in gold. For a fleeting moment, I thought maybe safety still lived here. But as I stood in that glow, key in hand, I knew the night wasn't finished with me. Because some truths don't stay hidden once they've been brushed awake. And what she had pulled me away from, that staircase, that room above, wasn't gone. It was still waiting. And it wanted me back. Inside, the house breathed familiarity. Cedar from the old desk in my study. Faint traces of morning coffee. The quiet tick of the wall clock that had measured my days for decades. I hung my jacket, loosened my collar, and let the ordinary steps of routine guide me toward the kitchen. The kettle hissed, the beans cracked under the grinder, and the smell rose like an anchor in a storm. But even as I poured the water, her voice still clung to me, trembling and sharp, refusing to be drowned out by ritual. I carried the mug to the living room, lowering myself into the leather armchair that creaked like an old friend shifting its weight. The heat steadied my hands, but not my thoughts. My mind circled back to the dinner table. The forced smiles, the sudden attentiveness, the way every detail seemed polished just enough to hide what lay beneath. Her mother's hand hovering by my glass, his grin stretched too wide, and her eyes, terrified, fixed on that staircase as if the steps themselves were a threat. Why? The question pressed against me harder than the steam from the cup. Why would a girl who loved family gatherings beg me to leave? Why would she risk anger, whispers, punishment, unless the danger upstairs outweighed them all? I thought of him, always smiling, always pitching, always pulling me into ventures that left me with nothing but regret. Each failure still lived in a folder upstairs in my study, thick with promises that had rotted before they touched the ground. 3 days ago, he had barged into my house, full of talk about a chance I couldn't miss. A coastal property this time, shiny brochures, guaranteed returns, and the same desperate gleam in his eyes I'd seen too many times before. I'd laid the folder on the desk, pages spilling like scars. The half-built condos that swallowed 70,000, the mining rigs that never arrived, the cafe that dissolved with its owner's lies. His voice had risen, accusing me of never trusting him. My voice had stayed even. I trust results. He left that night with the slam of a door that rattled the glass. The next morning, all 4 tires on my car were slashed clean at the sidewalls, neat, deliberate, irreparable. Not vandalism, not chance. A message, and when I called him, his pauses were longer than his words. He insisted it must have been kids, then turned it into outrage at my suspicion. But the truth was already writing itself in the silence between his answers. Now, sitting in the dim glow of my living room lamp, I felt the weight of those 3 days pressing into tonight. His birthday dinner hadn't been a celebration. It had been a stage, a script, an invitation written in bait. And if not for her trembling grip, if not for her whispered plea, I would walk straight into whatever waited upstairs. The coffee cooled untouched. My gut told me the story wasn't finished. No, it had only just begun. And whatever had been waiting above that staircase, it wasn't done waiting for me. I woke before dawn, the house wrapped in that kind of silence that makes every sound feel borrowed. The floorboards groaned beneath my feet as I moved to the kitchen, filling the kettle, grinding the beans, repeating the rituals that had steadied me through decades of storms. The hiss of water, the dark swirl of coffee. It should have grounded me. But memory has its own clock, and was already replaying every detail of last night like it refused to let me breathe. I sat at my study desk, the mug warm in my hands, the folder heavy before me. His ventures, his promises, sprawled across years of disappointment. Condos that collapsed into empty shells, investments that turned to vapor, partnerships with men who vanished in the dark. Each page carried the same handwriting of betrayal, the same trail of money gone and trust burned. I should have thrown it away long ago, but something in me always needed proof. Proof that my doubt hadn't been cruelty. It had been survival. I closed my eyes and saw him again. Not the man with quick excuses and sharper smiles, but the boy sitting in a dugout, cap too big for his head, hope too heavy for his shoulders. That boy had wanted the world. And somewhere inside, I still wanted to believe he could reach it. But the man who waited for me last night at the top of those stairs, he wasn't a boy anymore. He was someone who had learned to use love as a tool and family as leverage. The morning light seeped through the curtains, pale and cold. I should have felt safe here, in the home I built with my own hands, surrounded by wood and stone that never lied to me. But her eyes followed me into the room, urgent, wide, desperate. She had seen something, and she had chosen me. Whatever danger waited above those stairs, it was real enough to shake her voice and steady her resolve. I reached for the ledger my father had left me, its pages worn with grease and years of honest numbers. He used to say every truth fits on a line. You just need to ask the right question. I opened to a blank page and wrote 3 words that pressed into the paper harder than I intended. Track the pattern. And staring at the ink bleeding into fibers, I knew the pattern had already begun, because last night wasn't the end. It was the opening move, and the next one was already on its way. By the time the kettle hissed again, the window over the sink had turned a bruised shade of gray. I poured the water slow, watching the ground bloom, steam curling like smoke from a fire I couldn't see. The ritual should have calmed me, but the silence pressed heavier than it ever had. Memory has no off switch. It walks in uninvited, carrying moments you thought you buried. And this morning, it carried her eyes. I moved to the study, opening the drawer that groaned like it resented my hand. The folder sat where it always had, thick and accusing, and I laid across the desk like a ledger of debts I had never chosen. Page after page. Condos abandoned, investments gutted, partnerships that dissolved like smoke. Each failure wore his signature. Each loss carried my name at the bottom line. And yet, a father keeps hoping, like a man staring at a cracked foundation, swearing maybe one more layer of stone will make a hole. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling, and felt the weight of years press against me. There were 2 stories, always 2. One where I was a hard man, too stubborn to believe in him. Another where I was a fool, believing too long. Both lived in me, and both had left scars. But now there was no escaping the truth. Last night had not been about reconciliation. It had been a plan. Carefully staged, perfectly dressed, wrapped in wine and laughter, and aimed directly at me. My eyes drifted to the window. The street outside was still, the mist clinging low, swallowing the edges of houses like a secret. Across the way, my neighbor's porch light flickered on, steady and routine, a small anchor against the storm. For decades I had trusted that rhythm. The sound of a broom against concrete, the quiet nod of a man who never pried. But last night proved routine can't shield you from betrayal that lives under your own roof. I closed the folder with more force than I meant to, the thud echoing through the room. I told myself it was just paper, just ink and weightless lies, but the truth was clear. It was a pattern. And patterns don't end on their own, they tighten. They coil. They wait for the moment you're not ready. The coffee had gone cold in my hands when I finally admitted it. Last night wasn't just survival. It was warning. And the next move in this game was already walking toward me, quiet as a footstep on carpeted stairs. The morning stretched thin, a gray light draped across the street, like gauze pulled over a wound. I stepped onto the porch with a second cup of coffee, the steam rising in the chill, the quiet of the block broken only by the scrape of a neighbor's broom against his walkway. He didn't look up, didn't ask questions, just kept sweeping, steady as ever. It was a kind of ordinary sight that should have calmed me. Instead, it made me realize how far from ordinary my life had drifted. I turned back inside, the walls too familiar to feel safe anymore. The folder still sat on the desk in the study, heavier than it should be, a record of years spent hoping where hope had no business living. I ran my fingers over the papers, the contracts, the receipts, proof stacked like bricks, and beneath them all, my father's ledger, his handwriting steady, his belief unshaken that numbers told the truth even when people wouldn't. I flipped to the fresh page, the one I had marked with 3 words. Track the pattern. The pattern was already speaking. 3 days ago, his pitch, full of urgency, promising gold when it was only sand. 2 days ago, the tires slashed clean, a warning disguised as vandalism. Last night, the dinner dressed as celebration, the staircase glowing like a stage light meant only for me. Step after step, all part of the same rhythm, a rhythm that was quickening. And when rhythms speed up, they always lead to a drop. I closed the ledger and walked into the garage, pulling the pruners from the wall. My hands worked the steel blades, testing their spring, listening to the small snap as they closed. Out in the yard, I cut at the roses, clean angled strokes, dead with falling at my feet. Growth requires removal. That's what my father had taught me. And with every cut, I felt the truth sharpen inside me. Love alone wasn't enough anymore. Love had to stand with a plan, or it would get broken under the weight of betrayal. By noon, the walkway was lined with bundles of clippings, neat and ready for the city to take away. I stood there, sweat cooling on my skin, and looked back at my front door. The paint near the lock still carried a faint scuff from decades ago, when my father had nudged it open with his boot. Some marks never get sanded out. They stay, quiet, steady reminders that even homes carry their ghosts. I knew then that last night was not a mistake. It was intent, calculated, dressed in suits and chandeliers, waiting just beyond a staircase I hadn't climbed. And whatever had been planned for me, it hadn't vanished with my escape. It was still out there, patient, unfinished. And the silence that followed me now was not safety. It was the pause before the next move. The afternoon dragged like a weight tied to my chest. I tried to eat, a slice of bread, an egg on the pan, but every bite tasted of metal. My thoughts circled back to her, to the way her hand had clung to my sleeve like an anchor, to the way her eyes had darted toward that staircase, as though it carried the shadow of something she couldn't say aloud. Fear like that doesn't come from imagination. It comes from seeing too much, too young. I poured another cup of coffee and carried it to the study, setting it beside the folder I couldn't bring myself to close completely. The pages fanned open like a wound that refused to heal. Deals that had crumbled, money poured into pits, promises that had turned to dust. Each line in that file had a weight, and all of them pointed to one truth. Last night was not improvisation. It was a plan rehearsed until it gleamed. I stood at the window, watching the street. The fog had lifted, but the silence stayed heavy and expectant. Across the road, the neighbor's curtain moved just slightly before settling back, the kind of cautious check a man makes before stepping outside. It comforted me more than I wanted to admit, knowing someone else was awake. Someone else was steady, but it also reminded me that steadiness doesn't mean safety. Not when danger comes wearing your own bloodline smile. I turned back to the desk and opened my father's ledger again, writing out the pattern with my hand steady and slow. Tuesday, his pitch. Wednesday, the tires. Thursday, the dinner. 3 moves in sequence, deliberate as hammer strikes. And I knew enough about building to understand this wasn't the top of the staircase. It was only the first steps. The phone buzzed on the table, vibrating against the wood. I stared at the screen, the number flashing unfamiliar, though something in my chest already told me who it would trace back to. I let it ring twice before I picked up, my voice flat, my pulse sharp. On the other end came a voice too bright for morning, too eager to hide its cracks. "Dad, are you free? We need to talk." And in that instant, I knew the game hadn't ended when I walked out that door. It had only shifted. And now, the next move was knocking on my line. His voice carried the kind of ease a salesman puts on like a jacket. Smooth on the outside, stitched with urgency underneath. "It's nothing serious," he said too quickly, as if he needed me to believe it before I even asked the question. "Just thought we could sit down, clear the air, maybe go over a few things." His words were casual, but his pauses betrayed him. The silence between sentences was longer than the sentences themselves. I let him speak, listening more to what wasn't said than what was. I'd spent a lifetime in boardrooms where men hid their desperation behind smiles, where every polished phrase was a wall meant to keep you from seeing the cracks underneath. His voice now was no different. It wasn't a peace offering. It was a lure, and I could hear it trembling with the weight of whatever was waiting behind it. When I didn't answer right away, he filled the space, the brightness in his tone tightening. "We've got people interested in opportunities. Real ones this time. You could look things over. Tell me what you think. I know you'd see angles others might miss." He was building scaffolding with words, hoping I'd climb it without noticing the foundation was already rotting. I said nothing, staring at the paper spread across my desk, the trail of failures that had already cost me more than I wanted to count. The ledger was still open, my own handwriting staring back at me, stark against the page. Tracked the pattern, and the pattern was unfolding in real time, right there in my ear. "Dad." His voice cracked slightly, a hint of frustration pushing through the varnish. "Are you listening?" I leaned back, letting the silence stretch, knowing silence could be sharper than any refusal. And as he spoke again, pushing harder, layering charm with pressure, I realized what had been gnawing at me since last night. This wasn't about another business deal. It wasn't about money at all. It was about control. And whatever had been waiting for me upstairs wasn't finished. It had simply changed its angle of attack. The call ended, but the echo of his voice lingered in the room like smoke. I set the phone down, staring at the ledger, and felt the air tighten around me. The game had moved from that staircase to my doorstep, and the next knock was coming. The house grew heavy with silence, the kind that presses against your ribs until your breath feels stolen. I stood at the window, half in behind the curtain, and watched the road beyond the gate. Empty. Too empty. The kind of emptiness that doesn't calm. It warns. Somewhere out there, beyond sight but not beyond reach, I knew eyes were waiting. Behind me, the clock ticked with deliberate slowness, each second a blade cutting deeper into my nerves. I replayed her grip on my arm, those desperate eyes fixed on the staircase, the urgency in her voice. That wasn't the fear of a child who had imagined shadows. That was the fear of someone who had seen the monster behind them. The phone buzzed again. This time, a message. Just one line glowing across the screen. Asterisk, don't leave. Not yet. Asterisk, no name attached. No explanation. Only that command, sharp and certain. My hand hovered over the phone, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. Whoever sent it knew exactly where I was, and exactly what I was about to do. I closed the ledger, my fingers pressing hard into the leather cover, as if I could crush the truth hidden inside. But the truth wasn't in the book anymore. It was circling me now, moving closer with each second that passed. The faintest creak broke from the back porch. Not the sound of it settling, not the wind. A weight had shifted where no weight should be. And in that single sound, I knew the next move wouldn't come from me, it would come from them. The boards groaned again, this time closer, like a breath pressed against the thin wall of the house. My chest tightened as I reached for the lamp, hand trembling, but I froze before touching it. Light would only paint a target, and right now the dark was the only thing keeping me unseen. The silence that followed was worse than the sound itself. Each second stretched out, my pulse loud in my ears, until I almost wished they'd move again just to end the waiting. Then, a scrape, metal against wood. Not clumsy, not rushed. A slow, deliberate drag that told me whoever was out there wanted me to know they weren't in a hurry. I backed away from the window, careful not to let the floor betray me. My heel brushed against the edge of the rug, and that's when I saw it. The corner flipped up, revealing a hatch in the floor I had never noticed before. A square of wood outlined by shadows, and a small iron ring flush with the boards. My breath hitched. The ledger, the whispers, the warning message. Maybe this was why. Maybe the danger wasn't only outside. Maybe it had been hidden beneath my feet the entire time, waiting for the night I'd be forced to look. I crouched, fingers brushing the ring, torn between two terrors, what was waiting outside the walls and what secrets waited in the dark below. The boards creaked again, closer than ever, and I realized with a chill that I was out of time. My heart pounded as I hesitated over the iron ring. The weight of it felt too much for just my fingers, like the whole house was pressing down, urging me to open what should have stayed closed. The scrape of movement outside stopped again. The silence was suffocating, thick with the presence of something just out of reach, something I couldn't name but could feel in my bones. I yanked at the ring, the wood groaning as the hatch reluctantly gave way. The darkness below was immediate, swallowing the thin sliver of light from the room above. The air that rose from the cracks smelled stale, like old dust and something else, something deeper, rotting, decaying. A chill ran through me, but I had no choice. There was no way back now. The moment I moved down, I could feel it, the sensation that something was waiting, but just out of sight, just behind me. It was a sound, not exactly. It was a shift, a pressure against the back of my neck, like being watched by something too close. My breath hitched, and I froze, listening for a sound that never came. The stairs creaked under my weight as I descended, the faintest light from above barely illuminating the first few steps. The darkness thickened as I reached the bottom, where the air was cooler, the walls damp. But it wasn't the darkness that unsettled me. It was a feeling of being so far from the house, from safety, with no way to escape if something went wrong. And then, as my foot hit the last step, I heard it. The faintest of whispers, barely a sound, but they're nonetheless. The sound of someone or something just behind me, waiting, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me my core, that the door had closed behind me without a sound. I wasn't alone anymore. The whisper came again, but this time it wasn't just a sound. It was a presence, like something was crawling through the dark beside me, so close I could feel it, breathing, shifting. My pulse quickened, but I didn't dare move. The air was thick with tension, each breath a struggle, as if the very walls of the basement were pressing in on me. I could taste the dust, the decay, in the back of my throat, and yet the silence was louder than any sound could have been. I turned slowly, the hairs on my neck rising with each inch, the shadows pressing around me like they had substance, like they were alive, waiting for me to acknowledge them. The room was colder now, colder than it had been moments ago. The dampness seemed to rise from the very floorboards, chilling my skin, making my fingers stiff as I reached for the flashlight in my pocket. The beam of light cut through the dark, but it didn't feel like it was enough. It never feels like enough when you're trying to uncover something that was never meant to be found. The light flickered once, twice, and then finally steadied, revealing a part of the basement I hadn't noticed before. A small wooden door, hidden in the corner, half concealed by the stack of old boxes and crates. I stepped closer, drawn to it against every instinct telling me to turn and run. My breath came in shallow bursts, my hand cold as it hovered over the handle. The door creaked under my touch, as though it had been waiting for years to be opened. With a deep breath, I turned the knob. The door groaned open, revealing a room darker than any shadow I'd ever seen. Inside, something shifted, something alive. I stepped forward, heart pounding, and the floor beneath me shifted. The trap had already been set. My foot slipped as I took the first step inside, the floorboard groaning beneath me like a warning. The door closed behind me with a soft thud, as if sealing me in, trapping me with whatever was waiting in the dark. The flashlight beam flickered, illuminating the room just enough to see its jagged edges. Dust hung thick in the air, particles swirling around like the remnants of forgotten time, untouched for years, decades maybe. The walls were lined with shelves, crammed with old jars, faded papers, and boxes of things I didn't want to know about. But it was the center of the room that pulled me in, an old chair facing the corner. At first, I thought it was empty. Then I saw it, just a glint in the dark, a shadow that didn't move with the rest of the room. I stepped closer, and the air grew colder, a deep chill that made my breath fog in the beam of light. The chair, wooden and ancient, creaked under the smallest shift of air, the way it would have if someone had just risen from it, or was waiting to a soft click. A mechanical sound I couldn't place. My heart jumped as the flashlight flickered again, this time blinking out completely. I swung my arm, trying to bring it back, but the light died. In the pitch black, I heard something. A whisper or perhaps a breath. It didn't matter, because I felt it. Cold fingers brushed the back of my neck, and I froze. Not alone. I wasn't alone. And whatever waited here had been waiting longer than I realized. I held my breath, heart hammering in the dark, as the room seemed to tighten around me. My fingers gripped the empty air where the flashlight had been. I fumbled in my pockets, searching for another source of light, but my hands felt numb, every movement slow, every muscle rigid with fear. The cold had seeped deeper, more insistent now, wrapping around me like invisible hands. Then came the sound, footsteps, soft, deliberate, so slow that at first I thought I was imagining them, but then they grew louder, closer. Every step rang out in the silence like a drumbeat in my chest. My mind screamed to run, to do anything but stand here and wait. But I couldn't move. I was paralyzed, caught in the grip of something unseen, something that had been waiting, watching me all this time. A gust of air brushed my cheek, colder than before. My eyes darted around the room, every corner now thick with shadows, shifting shapes that didn't belong. And then I saw it, just beyond the darkened shelf in the far corner, a figure, barely visible at first, just a whisper against the blackness. But as I blinked, it came into focus, its outline sharp and jagged against the dim light of the basement. It was standing there, motionless, staring directly at me with eyes that seemed to glow faintly, a sickly green in the dark. My breath caught. Time slowed. Every instinct screamed at me to move, to run, to escape. But my legs refused to answer. I was trapped, cornered, unable to tear my gaze away. The figure took one step forward. A low, guttural voice broke the silence, its words cutting to the tension like a blade. "You shouldn't have come here." The words hit me like a slap, sharp and cold, as if the air had shifted with the weight of them. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. I wanted to run, wanted to scream, but the figure's eyes, those faintly glowing eyes, held me frozen in place. The shadows stretched longer, warping the room until it felt like the walls were closing in. Every inch of space now felt filled with something other, something that didn't belong here. It stepped closer, slowly, methodical. Its movements were almost graceful, too smooth for something so unnatural. The floor creaked under its weight, but it made no sound, as if the very act of moving was calculated. I couldn't tear my eyes away. My body screamed to flee, but I was anchored in place by that voice, that presence. "You think you could just walk in here," it said again, the words dripping with a strange, guttural calm. "This house isn't yours. Never was." It took another step. A chill ran down my spine. I could feel the air shift, the temperature drop even further. My breath came in short, ragged bursts, visible in the dim light. I wanted to yell, to ask what it wanted, to demand why it was here, but the words lodged in my throat, thick and suffocating. The figure stopped just within arm's reach, its presence pressing in on me like the weight of 100 years. I could feel the malice wrapped in every inch of its being. And then it spoke again, its voice low and haunting. "Leave while you still can." But even as it said the words, I knew the truth. There was no leaving now. It wasn't just a warning. It was a command that would only end when the door behind me was shut forever. I wanted to move, wanted to scream, but my body wouldn't listen. It felt like time had stopped, like the world had gone still, leaving only the thudding of my heart and the cold, suffocating air pressing in on me. The figure was so close now that I could feel the heat radiating from it. Despite the chill in the room, it wasn't just standing anymore. It was almost looming, its form darker than the shadows that wrapped around it. "You still don't get it, do you?" The voice slithered into my ears, thick with something ancient, something predatory. "This house doesn't want you. It never has. It's been waiting for you to come back." I took a shaky breath, my chest tight with the weight of its words. My mind raced, trying to piece together how I had gotten here, how I had been drawn into something that felt much older, much darker than I ever realized. This house, this place, I had always thought of it as home. But now it felt like the cage. My fingers trembled, reaching for anything to break the hold this thing had on me. I grabbed for the light switch, my hand brushing the cold metal. But the moment I touched it, the air around me grew even heavier. A low hum reverberated through the walls, vibrating the bones of my body. The figure's shadow seemed to stretch, contort, until it was no longer just one thing. It was something larger, something more dangerous. I felt it then, the sensation of being trapped, of being a part of the very thing I feared most. My back pressed against the cold stone of the wall, the weight of the figure inching closer, its breath now audible low, like the growl of something waiting to devour. "You can't escape," it whispered, the finality in its voice sending a shock of cold through my veins. Not this time. And as the darkness closed in, I realized one thing. The door I had walked through had never been an escape. It was the beginning of something far worse. The air was suffocating now, as if the very walls were pulling in, closing me tighter like a fist. I couldn't escape it, couldn't escape them. The figure in front of me didn't just loom. It radiated something ancient, something I could feel gnawing at the edges of my mind. It wasn't just a physical presence. It was the weight of a history I had never understood, and yet it was being written in every breath I took. "I told you," the voice hissed again, louder now with a cruel, knowing twist. "You don't belong here. Not anymore." It took a slow step forward, the floor underfoot groaning in protest. My pulse raced, but my body refused to move. Fear gripped me by the throat, and every instinct screamed for me to turn, to run, to do anything other than stay. But I was stuck, trapped in this room, caught between the shadows and the cold weight of truth. My fingers dug into the stone wall, my breath shallow, and for a moment I thought I was going to crumble right there. But then something shifted in the air, a crackling energy that charged the room, a static hum so powerful it nearly knocked me off balance. It was like the house itself was coming alive, its walls bending, groaning, as though it was waking from a long slumber, and I realized, with a sickening certainty, that it had been waiting for me. Suddenly, the figure moved, faster than I could comprehend. It was on me before I could blink, its hand a cold, clammy pressure against my throat. I gasped for air, but it was as if the very air had turned to stone. The figure's face was inches from mine now, its eyes glowing, swirling with something dark, something that wanted nothing more than to consume me whole. "You should have listened," it growled, the words dripping with an almost parental disappointment. "This house, this place, it belongs to me, and now you'll never leave." The grip on my throat tightened, and for the first time in my life, I understood what true fear felt like. And as the world around me began to spin, fading into darkness, the house seeming to swallow me whole, I knew I had made the mistake of a lifetime. It was already too late. I struggled for air, my lungs burning, as the figure's grip tightened around my throat. Every movement felt like molasses, slow and deliberate. The darkness in the room pressing on me from all sides, heavy, suffocating, as if the house itself was closing its jaws around me. I clawed at the hand, desperate, but it felt like trying to pull apart iron. It didn't budge. I couldn't breathe. The room swam before my eyes, everything starting to blur, edges melting, my vision dimming. But then, just as the last of my strength began to fade, I felt it, a flicker in the air, a sudden shift. Someone, was moving in the dark behind me, but I couldn't see it, couldn't turn to face it. And then a voice, not the figures this time. A whisper, low, distant, familiar. Get up now. It hit me like a shock, a jolt of adrenaline that snapped my muscles awake. The figure's grip loosened just enough for me to take a breath, shallow, desperate, and with the little strength I had left, I pushed against its chest. For a moment, I thought I'd never get free, but then a surge of force, a final push, and I broke free, stumbling back, gasping for air. I crashed into the wall behind me, heart thundering in my ears. My eyes searched the dark room frantically, but the figure, asterisk at asterisk, was gone, vanished, like a shadow swept away by the wind. The air felt too still now, too quiet, but I knew it wasn't over. The same presence, that same weight, hung in the space around me. I wasn't alone. And that whisper, it echoed, lingering like a promise. Asterisk, it's not over. Asterisk. I turned to the door, but it was locked. The room had changed. The walls were no longer the same. They had shifted, warped, and now I knew something far worse awaited me on the other side. My hand shook as I backed away from the door, every nerve screaming to flee, to escape, but my feet wouldn't move. The whispering voice, the one that called out to me, the one that lingered, still echoed in my head like a dull thrum, pulsing beneath my skin. I ran my fingers along the wall, searching for something, anything to ground myself. But the stone felt cold, colder than before. The air was thick with stillness that was almost suffocating, the house pressing in, drawing tighter around me. The door, asterisk that asterisk door, had been locked. But when I reached the knob again, the metal felt warm to the touch, too warm, as though it had been waiting. I hesitated, the handle slick with sweat, my breath shallow in the silence. There was no escaping it now. No more second chances. Whatever was inside this house, whatever was waiting, was ready. With a trembling hand, I turned the knob. The door swung open on its own, as though it had never been locked. I stepped through the threshold, the darkness on the other side swallowing me whole. The room stretched out before me, impossibly vast, its shadows moving in ways that weren't quite natural. There was no light, no sound except for the faintest of whispers, like 1,000 voices barely audible, just beyond the edge of hearing. I took another step, then another, until my foot hit something soft. I bent down, my hand brushing across it. Paper, crumpled. I pulled it into the dim light and unfurled it slowly, the weight of the words heavy in my hands. It was a letter, but not just any letter. It was a map of this house, but not as it was now. It showed corridors, rooms that had never been there, places I didn't recognize, stretching out deeper, further than I had ever imagined. And then the letters began to shift, blurring before my eyes, changing, rearranging. "You've been here before," the whisper said again, louder this time, closer. "And now you'll stay forever." My pulse quickened, my heart hammering in my chest. This wasn't just a house. This was a trap, and I had walked right into it. I stood there, staring at the letter as the shadows in the room began to shift, as if something was stirring just beneath the surface of the walls. The map in my hand seemed to pulse with an energy of its own, lines blurring and reforming, revealing paths I had never seen before, tunnels hidden behind false walls, doors leading to places I couldn't begin to imagine. Every part of the house I thought I knew was suddenly foreign, as though the very foundations of my reality were shifting beneath my feet. The whisper came again, louder now, vibrating through the very floorboards, rattling the windows in their frames. You shouldn't have opened it. The voice didn't sound like a warning anymore. It sounded like a threat, like something ancient, its breath steeped in rage and regret. The walls themselves seemed to hum with the weight of it, vibrating, almost as if the house itself was alive and breathing, a living creature that had been waiting for this moment. I could feel it, that presence, thickening in the air around me, pressing in from all sides, as if the house was closing in, shifting, trapping me here, locking me in a place that I had never truly understood. My pulse raced, every nerve on edge, every instinct screaming to leave, to run, to escape. But where would I go? The house had already claimed me. I knew that now, deep in my bones. The floor beneath me trembled again, harder this time, and I stumbled back, my heart hammering as a low growl echoed through the walls. Something moved in the corner of my vision, too fast for me to fully catch, too shadowed to recognize, but it was there, watching, waiting. I looked at the letter again, the words shifting once more, blurring into a new sentence that I could barely read. The letter swirled into a single, chilling phrase. You are part of it now. My blood ran cold as the room seemed to spin, the walls closing in even tighter. The whisper was right there, in my ear now, like the breath of something ancient, something that had been waiting far too long to be released. And then, from somewhere behind me, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, closing in. I wasn't alone. Not anymore. The footsteps drew closer, each one sending a ripple of cold through the air. My heartbeat was deafening now, pounding in my chest like a drum, too loud for the room to be real. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but the weight of the air, the feeling of being surrounded, it anchored me to the spot. I turned, slowly, the flashlight shaking in my hand, and there it was, asterisk the thing asterisk, standing just beyond a beam of light, its figure barely perceptible in the gloom. It was taller than anything human should be, the shape distorted in ways I couldn't comprehend, its form shifting like smoke caught in a wind that didn't exist. And yet, somehow, the most terrifying thing wasn't its size or its features. It was the absence of them. There was nothing defined about it, just endless darkness, endless nothing, yet somehow more real than anything I had ever seen. The air crackled, thick with malevolent force, and I could hear its presence, even if it had no face, no voice. The whisper came again, louder this time, echoing to the walls, vibrating in my bones. Asterisk is you. It didn't feel like a sentence. It felt like a statement of truth, something that had always been waiting to be uncovered, something that had been part of me all along. I felt it then, deep in my chest, asterisk a connection, asterisk like a thread had been woven through the very fabric of my being, pulling me toward this thing, this place. The room seemed to stretch, bending the walls, the ceiling, everything around me folding into the same dark space. The map, those lines I thought I had been following, they weren't guiding me. They were bringing me here. I couldn't move. My body was frozen, caught between terror and some horrible fascination. The thing reached out, a hand of shadow, fingers stretching impossibly long, curling toward me like it had always known I'd come. The air turned ice cold, the pressure so thick it felt like I was drowning in it. And then, in that moment of weightless panic, I understood. It wasn't just a house. It wasn't just them. It was me. I had walked into my own trap, not by mistake, but by choice. And now, there was no going back. I stood there, rooted to the spot, feeling the shadows close in tighter, like tendrils curling around my very soul. The thing in front of me had no shape, no face, but I could feel its presence, its hunger. It was no longer something distant, something to be feared in theory. It was here. It had always been here. The house, the whispering, the dark corners of my mind that had never let me rest. It was all connected. I could hear my pulse, loud and rapid in my ears, drowning out everything else, except for that whisper, that voice that was me, seeping into every thought. You're part of it now, it said again like a chant, like an inevitability. Every word seemed to burn its mark on my mind, twisting it until I couldn't tell where I ended and where it began. The walls shook, or was it me shaking? The room felt smaller, tighter, closing in from all sides. The air thickened, suffocating me. The weight of this house, the weight of it, pressed down harder with every breath I took. I tried to move, tried to scream, but my body wouldn't obey. The very ground beneath me felt unsteady, as if it was shifting beneath my feet, adjusting to something new. I turned, desperate, searching for a way out, but the door, the one I thought was my escape, was gone. The window, too. There was no escape. There never had been. The figure stepped closer, its presence now a tangible force, cold and all-consuming. And in that moment, I understood. This wasn't a chase, a hunt. This was the end of the long game. A game that had been played for far longer than I had been alive. And I, unknowingly, had always been the pawn. It raised its hand, and the air crackled with a sudden violent energy. I braced myself, but nothing could prepare me for what happened next. The darkness around me rushed forward, wrapping around me in waves, until I couldn't see, couldn't breathe. I was swallowed whole, consumed by the very thing I had once feared. And then, just as quickly as it had started, there was silence. Absolute, suffocating silence. The house was still. The figure was gone. But I knew, deep in my gut, that it wasn't over. I hadn't been freed. I had been marked, claimed by whatever ancient force had been waiting in the shadows. There was no going back now. I was still, as if time had frozen around me, and the only thing moving was the pulse of the house, the steady thrum of life beneath its walls. But there was no life left in me. The air hung thick, heavy with the feeling of being watched, of being known. I could feel the weight of it pressing down, the house around me now more like a body, one that had been waiting to claim me, to hold me in place, its walls closing in tighter. The silence stretched on, each second unbearably long, a deafening void. I tried to move, to take another breath, but it was like my body was no longer my own. The warmth of my own breath seemed foreign, like it didn't belong. Everything felt wrong. The ground beneath me no longer felt solid. I turned slowly, as if the act of movement might shatter whatever fragile hold I had on myself. The room was still untouched, but I knew the truth now. There was no escaping. The house had already consumed me, and I was caught in its grip, its trap. It wasn't just a physical space anymore. It had become my prison, my cage, and I was the one who had locked myself inside. A soft rustling from the shadows, the faintest sound, like whispers in a language too ancient to understand. But there was no one there. There were no more figures, no more voices, just the quiet, the oppressive, all-encompassing quiet. And then, from the corner of the room, I saw it, a sliver of light, cutting through the dark like a blade, a crack in the wall, too small to notice, yet too important to ignore. It beckoned, and for the briefest moment, I thought of running toward it. But as I stepped forward, the walls around me seemed to close in, blocking my path, pushing me back. "You belong here," the voice whispered again, deeper this time, almost a hum. "You will never leave." It was a truth I had always known but had been too afraid to admit. The house wasn't my prison. I was its keeper, its chosen occupant. And the more I tried to escape, the more it tightened its grip around me. There was no escape. There was only staying.